I mean, I just find it mind-blowing that people can transition from other industries into kind of biotech without that almost, like the joining element of going back to university and doing some kind of science degree, but you've had to learn everything hands-on, right?
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, it was definitely a consideration to go back to university, but I think the thought of 3 years of study, and I mean, not only that, it was the expense, to be honest, of having to go back and
Yeah.
get the degree. I knew I was determined, and I just thought, there are lots of inspiring people out there who've made the jump into various industries, not only biotech, but just from one to another. And I thought, let's just give it a go. I'm interested. I can learn. I have the determination to learn. Let's just do it. So, just through a lot of observation and the kindness of people to take the time to explain bits and pieces, it's been like a puzzle that's been coming together, really.
Hi everyone, welcome back again to another episode of the Blooming Late Scientists. I feel like I need a different intro because I say the same thing every time and you must be getting so bored of it, but I mean, what else do I say, right? Um Today I say I'm excited about everyone, but I feel like we have quite similar backgrounds, and I've said this to one other guest actually who had fashion is the hint of the background, or textiles. So I'd love to introduce Renuka Ramanujan. So I'm going to hand over to you and let you introduce yourself and your company and talk about what you do.
Thank you, Martina. Thank you so much for having me on here. It's really exciting to be able to talk about my story and just sort of the idea of blooming late scientists. So I'm Renuka, and I'm the founder of How, a biotech startup that is converting onion waste into a single-use plastic alternative for packaging, but other applications as well. And as you might have guessed, I don't have a scientific background. I started off as a textile designer and have slowly made my way into the world of biotech. And it's been a really exciting journey, and I'm really keen to keep digging into it.
I mean, it's so amazing that, I mean, I just find it mind blowing that people can transition from other industries into kind of biotech without that almost, like the joining element of going back to university and doing some kind of science degree, but you've had to learn everything hands-on, right?
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, it was definitely a consideration to go back to university, but I think the thought of 3 years of study, and I mean, not only that, it was the expense, to be honest, of having to go back and
Yeah.
get the degree. I knew I was determined, and I just thought, there are lots of inspiring people out there who've made the jump into various industries, not only biotech, but just from one to another. And I thought, let's just give it a go. I'm interested. I can learn. I have the determination to learn. Let's just do it. So, just through a lot of observation and the kindness of people to take the time to explain bits and pieces, it's been like a puzzle that's been coming together, really.
I think we underestimate just how much that contributes to our journeys, the kindness of other people, right? Because you often, when you, I don't know, when you think of like a business plan, for example, you don't factor in that there's going to be the kindness of other people, do you? This kind of just happens as a surprise along the way. Um, but in terms of the company now, then, so what kind of stage are you at?
Yeah, so I'm very early stage, I would say. I am at the point where I've got material prototypes of an onion-based packaging flexible film and paperboard. And right now I am I have the privilege of working with an amazing university in Glasgow, the University of Strathclyde, their Advanced Material Research Lab, and they are mechanically testing the material to see how it stands up to plastic and alternatives on the market, just to make sure we're going in the right direction, to see what weaknesses there are and how we can work on them. And on top of that, working with another incredible university, Northumbria University, to improve the sustainability of our processing methods. And yeah, hopefully we'll come out with a better prototype and MVP that we can get to market hopefully next year. Maybe that's optimistic. I don't know, but here's hoping.
It's good to be optimistic, right?
You have to be, honestly.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, we're going to dig into that because you're doing such a huge amount of work. But something you just said actually that I wanted to hit on was um, you talk about the sustainability of the actual process. And that is so key, isn't it? Because often we look at the end product and we go, oh, yeah, that's sustainable. But what happened to get you to that point? I guess there is. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of this, but is there a process that you have to prove to people and say, yes, actually, this is more sustainable than plastic, for example, because the process is more sustainable, everything is.
It's a really good point because currently that is being looked upon by independent watchdogs. Like there's no body that is sort of saying, as far as I know anyway, I'm again also still learning. So somebody might listen to this and be like, hey, no, there's this certification. But um as far as I know, the LCA is becoming more and more important to life cycle analysis, to demonstrate that a product is as green as it says it is. But there are things like B Corp, but other than that, you don't really hear companies talking about their process because it's proprietary. But I think for me, the reason I even started this business was because I was getting really frustrated at the fact that people weren't considering the whole picture. The whole picture is the whole point. It's not, like you say, just the end material. Because, yeah, I can create paper, but if I'm using um, sodium hypochlorite in that process, like that's pretty terrible for the people that are working with it. And you look at paper pulp factories and you see the stories from people working with really, really caustic bases, like alkali solutions, and you're just like, well, what's the point then? So I feel like, yeah, the entirety of the process has always been a key part of what I'm doing. And I think even though it's not a requirement, like a lot of these certifications that we have, the stuff in them, the standards that they have aren't that high because they're trying to help people transition. You almost need to put yourself out there and be like, I'm going to do better. I'm going to help make that step go higher. So I'm just trying to do the best I can so that when it comes to it, maybe we can all level up together. The industry can level up as a whole. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I mean, I guess it seems like an obvious question, but what was the reason you wanted to create a sustainable packaging anyway?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I come from a fashion textiles background and I worked in that industry for a while. And so the obvious thing would be, go into something that affects fashion and textiles because that's your lane. But to be honest, I got fed up with fashion and textiles. I had an experience where I was working at a really high-end company, and I think the pressure there was just ridiculous. And at the end of the day, I was sort of like overdressed, like that to me, it doesn't make sense. And in terms of like impact, I wanted to work in a sector where everyone could feel like they were being impacted by the sustainable aspect of what I was doing. Not to say that fashion isn't important. There's a huge cultural, individual expression element to it that I still love. But I think in terms of sustainability and the sustainable development goals, packaging seemed to me to be a really important aspect to deliver on. And we do have some amazing players in the market who are also tackling that, but we need as many solutions as possible. And I saw an opportunity that I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. Don't quite know 100% if it'll work, but I've got to try. So that's where it came about, really.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting that you came about and thought about onion skins because I just wouldn't have even entered my head. I just wouldn't have even thought about it. I mean, of course, we all think about waste and I try to do my bit to reduce waste, household waste. So like I grow vegetables a lot, so I compost a lot
Fantastic.
of our waste. Um, but I just never would have even thought about anything like that. I mean, how did you even get to this concept of onion skins?
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. We've had a discussion about, not having how having a certain background and maybe not the right background can actually work in your favor. I think the multidisciplinary aspect has been really fun and important here because coming from textiles, onion skins are often used for natural dyes, and that's something that's been done for time. People have been using them for ages in their projects, and I was doing that, and I just looked at them and thought, oh, they're still quite robust, even if I've put them through boiling water, and they're still holding up. They've still got shape. They're still very sturdy. It's almost a shame to throw them away. And from there, I was just like, oh, what if I just try making paper with them? And so just started very rudimentary experiments on my bedroom floor just to see what would happen. And it was interesting. I mean, they are very crude. Like, I've come a long way since then, but you have to start somewhere. Like, that's the thing. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's just sort of spurred on from there, really.
I mean, it's funny, isn't it, to think that that started out in your bedroom as just a little experiment making paper. Um, but I did not know that actually about the dyes and the onion skins.
Huh. Yeah, they've got
Didn't know that was a thing.
tannins in them, which they're really good for dyes because they help, as I've learned the chemistry of dyeing, as I've got into more of that, they help stick, I guess they sort of mordant better to the fabric. So if you dye something with a household waste or food that has tannins in it, there's a higher chance it's going to stick around for longer. So ideally, you want tannins in your dye, and onion skins are perfect for that. So yeah.
Oh, interesting. Because isn't, I mean, I'm saying the most basic questions here, but isn't tea really high in tannins?
Yeah, that definitely it does. I mean, you will notice that it stains. I mean, natural dyes in themselves are like there's a I could go on about those. They are quite a problem in the sense that people want to scale them up, but they're not necessarily scalable because, how do you make sure that they're same from batch to batch? But and they're maybe not as color fast and light fast as the synthetic dyes we have today, but there's something really beautiful about them. And yeah, you're right. Teas, as far as I know, I think you're right. They do have tannins in them as well. Yeah, good knowledge.
Yeah. I don't know how I know that. So let's go back now to kind of where you started out. So talk about that because I know obviously you've already mentioned that you have a textiles background. So let's go back to where you started.
Yeah. It's funny. I actually came to my degree thinking I wanted to study fashion. So you do a foundation year and you go where you want to go, and then they'll sort of place you where they think you're best suited or advise you strongly where they think you should go. But I came in thinking, yeah, I want to design clothes. And then very quickly I realized I'm not actually that interested in the clothes. I'm interested in the materials and how they come to be from like a raw material from a fiber to the finished product. And that whole process was fascinating. So it's not only, I guess, the makeup, but also the craftsmanship and the element of making that goes into it as well. But throughout university, I ended up studying printmaking, specializing in printmaking for textiles. And one of the things I noticed was that when we were in the print room, the inks and dyes that we were using, they all had to be kept in very specific conditions. We had to use fume hoods, and when we were disposing of the paste afterwards, they'd go into these like ominous blue vats that had to be disposed of in a certain way. We couldn't just pour them down the sink. And at the time, I just thought, oh, that's quite strange, like why is that the case? We've got them, so I get it all over my clothes, but yet I have to dispose them in a very precise way. That seems a bit counterintuitive. And then as I started digging into the chemistry of them, I realized, they're not so great and they're not doing a whole lot of good for the environment. And I just thought, I'd been introduced to natural dyeing and I thought, how could I transfer that to printing? So I did a bit of digging online and found some recipes, some old patents that had expired, and did a bit of tweaking with the recipes there and saw firsthand that I think that was the first sort of thing of going back to science from grade school of like, if I adjust this reaction happens and then this comes out. So that part of that process was fascinating and I loved that experimental side of things. And so after university, I wanted to keep up that sort of design, understanding the chemistry and really the process of what was happening with the material. So I interned at a biodesign institute in Amsterdam, where we were making mycelium insulation panels from spent beer grain at a local brewery. And that was quite instrumental because we were working in a clean lab that was sort of a pseudo clean lab, and that it had been built up in a very, I guess, rudimentary but impressive way. Like, it was surprisingly good, but also very much made by designers and, in consultation with microbiologists. But it was in a sort of big metal tin shed kind of thing. And we had a laminar flow that was covered with PVC and just everything. We got bits and pieces of real lab equipment and then mixed them up with not real lab equipment. So it was a really cool mixture of it was like being in a kitchen, but then veering towards a lab. It was really cool to have that DIY element and see you can do this. So I think that sort of spurred me on to be like, oh, okay, like it's not something that's just locked away in scientific institutions. It can happen. And then I had the chance to work along someone who had a biology background, and he was just showing me, how to make media, how to use an autoclave, which was really a pressure cooker, and how to sterilize your tools and things like that. And I sort of got to grips with lab etiquette there, very basic lab etiquette. But again, at that time I just thought, oh, I can do this. And we were working with mycelium, so we understood then about contamination and how to avoid that. And then I also wanted to do a project with bacterial dye. So as I mentioned, we were making media, and I was learning how to sort of put colonies onto plates and um, getting to grips with that. So that was a really exciting time, but it also the hyper local nature of the system. So working with a local brewery and then having a compost on site for the experiment that didn't work to grow hops again, like all of this sort of stuff it got me thinking about those design systems, which then led on to where I am with the onions, that idea of making a system that works as opposed to just isolating and focusing on the material itself. But yeah, throughout that period, I just thought, yeah, this is something I really want to do and I really want to pursue it. Let's see how we can make this a job, really. Yeah.
One of the things I really love about what you just described was this idea of it's almost a community, right? It's a community approach.
Yeah.
And a lot of science lacks that because, I mean, quite frankly, some of it can't be that way. But this part of science can be that way. And I think we spoke about this before when we chatted the other day, that for me, it reminds me of when I was doing my PhD, there was lots of this kind of secret lab stuff going on, and it was called biohacking. And now it's
Mm,
become mainstream, and I love it. It's just brilliant because it was so needed. And for so long, people wouldn't put any money into it. But now we seem to be at this really pivotal point where people want to invest money, they understand the importance of it, and it's such a great place to be. And for you, I mean, when you did make this transition into science, I know that you say you had help from others, but I mean, if you try and take that away, how difficult did you find it to try and get that scientific knowledge?
yeah. I mean, firstly, I would say it's a confidence thing because you you're told from, when you go off to study at university, you're already branched off at that point, saying you either go into science or humanities or whatever it is you want to do. So you're just told, okay, from that point on, it gets really esoteric. I can't understand that. So even looking at scientific journals, the words they're using, things like just you start going, okay, this format, it's something I'm really not familiar with because it is all out there to access. Like I appreciate that those journals are there and published. And so I could read them, but I remember at the beginning, I was like, ooh, I need to get a scientist to help me translate this information. Even though if I'd sat down for an hour maybe and just really concentrated hard, it would have been okay. But I think, yeah, just being able to contact scientists, most of them are quite excited when you do talk to them about their work. I think there's a certain way to go about it, which I also learned. You need to prove that you are interested in what they're doing. You have to take the time to research their papers, to understand their work, which is completely fair. Their time is precious and valuable. But without the help, I would say, yeah, it was extremely difficult. But that's just from a confidence standpoint. To talk about the help, I mean, even that the guy at the brewery who was showing me how to make an agar plate, like, I mean, it's pretty simple. We boiled potatoes to make the starch to do that. Like, it wasn't like we bought the powder or anything, but it was just knowing that I had a guide there who was like, this is how you do things. it made a world of difference. Nowadays, I think I'm okay with going online and sort of figuring it out, but that confidence to be like, this isn't going to blow up on me if I do it wrong, or um, I think it's people maybe don't realize if you're not in the science field that it can look extremely intimidating just because you're told, the lab is like a very clinical, sterile space, and there are rules you need to follow, and if you don't know those rules, you don't belong there. That's kind of the vibe that comes out from that, and it's a very serious occupation, so you need to know what you're talking about, because science is sort of the bedrock upon, we talk about truth and stuff like that. That's You need to know what you're talking about. It's a very highly um, well, there are a lot of highly respected professions, but science, I feel like, there's a notion of it being the truth, right? And so I
Mm.
think it's very difficult. It's very intimidating, essentially. Um, for me, at least, it was, and I needed that help. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess if you're looking from, I mean, I'm not saying that you're on the outside, but if we describe it like that, if you're looking from the outside in, it must feel that way because, I mean, lots of labs are not very clinical, actually. I mean, I worked in labs that were not clinical, and um, I mean, microbiology labs and molecular biology labs. I mean, if you go into a molecular biology lab, generally there's stuff everywhere, all over the place. Um, but I think we associate labs with these really, like you describe, when people are working with viruses, for example, they are clinical sterile spaces, right?
Mm,
Um, and we seem to associate it with that. So I can totally understand where that fear comes from. One of the things I did want to ask you, because I really love this space. And I mean, I know it's not packaging, but just yesterday or last week, there was actually something published in Vogue about Ganni and their new sustainable material. They've made like a handbag, and
yeah.
I love it. I mean, I just absolutely love it. Um, is there anyone out there that kind of aspires you? Is there anyone in particular that you look to and think, yeah, that's kind of who I want to model myself on?
Gosh, I mean, there's so many, and like, that Gani collaboration, I think it was a company called Modern Synthesis, and they're doing fantastic things.
Yes.
So yeah, all of them really. They're working. I know I mentioned not wanting to work in fashion, but I think I still really admire like what they're doing because the industry needs the help. So it's a huge yes from me for that. Another one is Radiant Matter. She's developed Alyssa Brunato. She's developed sequins that are cellulose based, and the company's just done an amazing collaboration with Stella McCartney, and the sequins, they look wonderful. And I know she also comes from a design background. I know Jen Keane at Modern Synthesis also comes from a design background.
Yeah.
And in the packaging space, we've got Notpla, and I know that they work with seaweed, and they've managed to scale amazingly. As I go through this journey, I'm learning how difficult that is, especially with the requirements that big retailers need. They've just done so well. So I'm massively impressed, and I would love to reach their heights and work alongside them. I think they've got a great sense of, we're doing this amazing thing, but we know there are other players that need to be involved as well, and I really appreciate that sentiment. So I look up to all of them, and it's so nice because all of them do have design backgrounds. Not all of them come from pure science backgrounds. They've brought the team on, which is the next step for me as well, to bring someone with that technical background, but they are living proof that this is entirely possible. So it always makes me smile, always gives me hope. And there's so many more that I could mention, but from the top of my head, those are the ones that spring to mind,
We could be here all day.
quite literally.
I mean, I just love it. And I guess what I would like to know is how, I mean, aside from the science, let's forget about that for a second, right? But you're essentially now running a company by yourself. Okay. You are the CEO of the company. It's just you, right? For
Yeah,
now.
it is just me. Yes, me, myself, and I.
So how would you say your original experiences before you moved into science have helped you in this process of running a business and doing things by yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I was already freelancing in the creative industries before I started this startup. And so, I mean, time and organization, I've had to learn that on that side of things. I think not coming from the science background and being in design, visual communication has enabled me to be able to break down concepts that, because ultimately, even though it is a biotech company, I'm going to be sharing this information with people who aren't from a science background either. And so they need to understand what's going on. So I think having the design side of things and being able to communicate visually, which a lot of people are drawn to as well, has been really, really helpful and simplifying some pretty complicated things that I also found complicated. So maybe it was helpful that I wasn't able to understand it from the get-go because I was like, what's a level I would have understood when I started this journey? So I think having that perspective was really, really helpful. And also just again, being a freelancer, you hustle. Like you have to go network, you have to pull on your contacts, you have to not be afraid of knocking on doors. I think that has definitely, I've sent my CV and portfolio out when I was freelancing so many times and also received so many like, sorry, no, you're not a fit, all this, all that. That builds resilience. And I think going into the space where it's like, okay, I don't really know much. I went in with quite low expectations, but I was still like, I can do this. Like, if I keep going, it's a numbers game. So I think all of those things have helped me progress and also, yeah, build resilience over time.
Yeah, I mean, two of the things I really love you said there is about the visual. First one's visual communication, right? And I am going to tell people who are listening to go and see the Howd website. It's actually spelled Huid, right? It's
Yeah,
you said it's
yes,
Dutch.
it is Dutch.
But I went to the website naturally. Yes, I went to the website naturally, and I was super impressed with the simplicity, but the ease at which I could understand what you were offering and what you were doing. And I mean, I'm talking about, we won't go into technicals, but I didn't even have to scroll down the screen to find out what it is you did. It was just there, simplified. This is what I do in simple terms. And
That's so
one of
good
the
to
things you
hear.
said was that because you, oh, it's so good, honestly. Um, and one of the things you said was that because you didn't have that scientific background, you came from that place of not knowing, and that helped you. And I think that is such a powerful place to be. In science, we often mistakenly assume that scientists are the best at doing all different roles in life science. So, for example, I'm a marketer. People often think, oh, well, if you're a scientist first and then you're a marketer, you're better because you know the science. But actually, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that you're better off not knowing a lot of the things, like you just described. So it
Interesting.
makes complete sense in that you said that, yeah, because, if you think about researchers, often the best way to research is to not know anything and just go out there and find the information. And I guess it's because there's no bias right at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting.
So it's almost like you go out there and you just look for information without bias. So I find that so interesting that you said that. And I can't think of the second thing that I was going to
I'm
say.
actually
I've totally lost my way now.
um
There were so many good things.
yeah.
Um, yeah, no. Oh, actually, I do remember. The other thing
Ah,
was that the skill set you've acquired. I mean, no matter, I'm sure that Howd will be a huge success.
oh,
But whatever happens to you, you're so. I mean, it's so investable and so employable because of this skill sets you have now. So, uh, you know, I don't know how you feel, but I think that that's a bonus no matter what, right?
absolutely. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, every founder has moments where they're just like, oh, this is going to fail, or like, I don't want to do this, or oh, I don't know how this is going to work. But in those moments, I think I've now gotten to the mindset where, yes, I've invested a lot of time. I would really love for it to work out, really. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't, then how much have I learned? What an amazing journey it's already been. It's been a steep learning curve. Like I was saying to another founder, we're on this path where every single day you're having to level up. There's no sitting down to your laptop and just being like, I'm going to fill out an Excel spreadsheet and feel completely in control of my day. It's like, no, you have to learn, you have to understand how to go about doing your VAT return, or just understanding, yeah, what sort of new literature review you want to plan out for the next experiment down the line, or what certifications you need to go for commercialization. And it's it's amazing. But I also think, again, you've got such insight. And also, I kind of like not knowing. I think if I knew everything that I needed to do, I probably wouldn't have started this journey in the first place, to be very honest with you. So
You'd be
probably a bonus.
overwhelmed.
Yes, yes, for sure.
So, I mean, I'm so excited for you. I mean, we met once the other day, and I'm so excited to see where you go and where you take the company. So from your perspective, what does the future look like for you?
Oof. Um, I'm at a bit of a crossroads in the sense that I'm trying to work out the best way to move the company forward. I, more than anything, would love to bring on a team, because I think that's going to be key to getting this thing really moving and commercialized. Um, in terms of sort of the business model, I think we spoke about it briefly the other day, but I am wondering, because I, as a designer, have a desire to see a finished product out there in the world. That's just what I was taught to do, and that's my mode of thinking. But I'm now learning within the whole supply chain that there's so many different aspects. If I'm supplying the raw material, that can itself have a huge impact, because then I'm supplying it to makers or manufacturers that can make that raw material all over the world into something that can have impact all over the world. And so I'm trying to realign my priorities right now and figure out what the best pathway for the business is. But if we're talking about
Sainsbury's, Aldi, you name it, and also across the globe. But more than anything, I think there's a social impact side to the whole project, where I'm really, one of the things I did when I was living in London was volunteer at a homeless shelter and soup kitchen. And from there, I think the agricultural waste food industry, I've sort of seen how much food waste there is, how it can be diverted back to people who really need it. So I mean, Howd is a business and a biotech startup, but I really aspire to be like something in the way of Patagonia, where they've really taken their values and tried to shape their brand around that. So working with food waste charities like Olio and Fair Share, who really value sort of taking food and or food waste and giving it to where it's really needed. That's something I really want to sort of dip into as this becomes bigger. But of course, the packaging impact is really important for me. And I mentioned global because another aspect, the social aspect of it, is that I don't know if I'm sure a lot of people know, or maybe they don't know, but with a lot of our single use plastic, it gets shipped over to other countries in the Far East. And having grown up between Asia and Europe, I've seen that sort of disparity firsthand. And I think a big motivation for creating a design system was to be able to relieve some of that inequity. It's a very what's the word? Maybe it's an arrogant thing to aspire to, but I was like, I want to do something about it. And I think by creating something that's biodegradable, um, you know, people won't be litter picking on the other side of the world and having to deal with our waste causing them damage. It's really unfair. And maybe their agricultural sectors, which are pretty strong, will be able to benefit from this innovation as well, and ergo the packaging there as well, and their landscape. So it's a whole, like, it's a tree spreading roots for me, essentially. There's so many things I would love to see with this project. It's always been more than just about biodegradable packaging, if that makes sense.
So one of the things I really wanted to say to all of that, I mean, I think it's amazing that you want to have this impact, and you described it as maybe it's arrogant for me to want to make that change. But I mean, I think it's not arrogant to want to make a change and have an impact on the world, is it? Right? It's not. It's actually it's the opposite. It's selfless. Um. So yeah, I think we should end that here by nobody thinking that it's arrogant to want to make a change, for sure. One of the things I want to ask you, because I know everyone's going to be wondering this, I think you're going to have an influx of people coming to find you. So if we want to know more about you and more about how do we find you?
Yeah, so I have an email, info@howd.co.uk. So as you said before, Howd is spelled Huid. Just for anyone who's interested, it's a Dutch word. It means skin. And if you'll notice the logo, there's a little line under the UI, and that means onion in Dutch. I thought I was being really clever when I made the name, but realize it may be quite difficult to think about or remember. But yes, info@howd.co.uk. And we even have an Instagram page. Feel free to message me on there. And yeah, and LinkedIn, of course, like my profile, you can find Howd on LinkedIn and my profile on LinkedIn. Feel free to drop me a message.
Okay. I mean, I'll add all the links as well. So if anyone's listening and you don't want to take the time to scout around, I'm going to add links to the end of the podcast. But Renuka, I just want to say thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you and hear from you. And I was just so happy when you got in touch and was like, yeah, I'd love to talk about it. I was like, yes, this is brilliant. This is what I want to hear about.
Oh, thank you.
So
Honestly,
thank you so
it's
much.
so nice. No, I appreciate it. And thank you for making the space. It's really nice to be able to talk about this experience. And I'm sure so many people have similar experiences. And I can't wait to dig into more episodes of the podcast and hear more from other people as well. So thank you.
Yeah, it's going to be great. So thank you to all the listeners as well for tuning in for another episode, and make sure you stay tuned for next week's one. Thanks, everybody. Bye.